Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Here we are for our third lecture. Um, and basically, I just want to make sure we got everything straight. So now we are going to evolve. We're going to evolve into, I guess you could say, more detail, more specific detail on how to write a news story. I appreciated just about everybody got their like that. Everybody's got their self-written biography profile story done. But now again, I sent them all back, all the ones I got in. I hope that they were helpful to you. Basically, I mean, I've seen a couple of stories so far. I'm recording this over the weekend, and I was actually like kind of pleased actually with some of the stories actually were written already. And I even have an example that I sent over the weekend of a story I felt that worked. Um, and I actually kind of like made a couple of corrections to it um, to to show like basically what exactly I'm looking for. There were a couple of things that need to be moved around, but anyway. Um, so basically, a lot of what we talk about right now is also chapter is going to be centered around chapters 7, 9, and 13. We're going to talk about like basically how a news story is actually structured. We're going to talk about news leads and like what to look for in the news lead. So first thing actually I want to do is I wanted to talk about the assignment that is actually the new assignment is actually due since the the first graded assignment, the profile on somebody you know is going to be due on Monday. That'll be today. When this is posted on Monday. So that story will be the profile story obviously is due on Monday, but now this is going to be due a week from Monday. Okay, um, which will be the 25th of September. Okay. Um, okay. So what I like to do is like I talk about like the, the importance of going macro to micro. Uh, so I like to kind of start off with like okay, let's start off by like just getting the story out, writing a story, getting the big thing done. But then I like to kind of like backtack a little bit after we do that and maybe like really hone in on probably something more specific, the most important part of the story, which is the lead. Okay. And that is typically, like I said, the first paragraph of the story. And so this second graded assignment is actually which will be posted. I mean, right now it's I'm recording this on a weekend, and this will be posted live on Monday. This assignment will be posted live on Monday. Anyway, um, what I do is I kind of go in a little bit of a lecture, like some of the things that I've actually seen so far, um, and um, and so basically, what this assignment does is what this assignment does is basically you're just going to write leads. In other words, first paragraphs of stories, essentially. Okay, the paragraph that identifies what the story is about and why do we care. Okay. I go into a little bit of thing here. Like I said, there were some good stories, but there was also some stories that basically really need to kind of like ground themselves in the fundamentals. That's my prognosis essentially. A couple of you sent PDFs. Okay, that's one. So a couple of basic requirements here that we need to be met as well. I only take Microsoft Word docs because I can't grade on a PDF. Okay, so please send a Microsoft Word doc. Um, Again, it's not a creative writing class, so no glorious adjectives unless the adjectives are factual. Like blue is an adjective. Blue for blue sky. That's if the sky is blue, then it's factual. Beautiful sky, however, is a subjective adjective. Okay, so we don't use those. Okay. The paragraphs are typically no more than a sentence or two, and the lead is really only one sentence, and that's it. Okay, so please keep that in mind when we do this leads assignment. Um, it's a full name on first reference, unless you're actually like you have two people with the same last name. Oh, sorry, it's full name on first reference, but if you're quoting, if let's say you're on the second reference, then it's actually the last name, and that's it. That's actually just the Associated Press style, essentially. Um, if you have two people with the same last name, then what you do is on second reference you print their full name. That's it. But it's full name on first reference. Okay, so I got to know your name, the person you're writing about. Okay, that's part of the story, right? I got to know who this is. If you're writing a story about somebody and it's going to go out there, maybe in a local area, maybe it'd be interesting to people who might know this person. Okay. Um, but they're not going to know them if you just put their first name there or just their last name. Okay. All right. I'd give you some tips. Sometimes it's good to like, I know you find a private area to maybe read out loud to like kind of give yourself an, this isn't that, story's supposed to be conversational. It's supposed to actually like read with like breaths, in between the paragraphs, that sort of thing. It's supposed to be simple. You're not supposed to really stumble over the words, as I demonstrated with that Titanic story. So sometimes it's a good idea to maybe just kind of read the story out loud, believe it or not. And just basically you'll, and then, then you can see like what makes sense to you, what is actually easy to read and access in your head. Because because if you can't like say it easily, you can't speak it easily, then you probably can't ingest it easily. Okay. Actually, a lot of times it's a good idea to like maybe have somebody else read the story too. Maybe like somebody who's not involved in the news business, because the people who are not involved in the news business are readers. I actually like to have my wife read. Well, I still do a lot of writing. I would have my wife read my story sometimes, and she would be pretty honest. And now, because sometimes people who are in journalism are a little bit too much inside the profession, and like they're interested in certain things that maybe other people aren't. A little too much, like too much about politics, stuff like that. A lot of journalists are into and stuff like that. Once you find that piece of information, you stick to it from top to bottom. Okay. And then that's basically you keep your story linear, themed on one subject and one subject only, or okay, one specific one, especially on a profile. What makes that person unique? Okay. All right. So this assignment basically is like it's writing leads. And one thing that happens, I've given this assignment before. One thing that happens is that a lot of people over the years have actually written what are essentially headlines. Okay. Headlines are different than leads. Headlines, again, I know I probably said this last week, but it's actually a different craft. First of all, they're typically written by editors, not the reporters, because it all goes with the actual structuring of the magazine or the publication or whatever. Okay, so it's an editor who kind of goes in there and basically says, okay, this is what I'm editing a story, this is what it's about, and this is how I feel this story should be presented. So it's almost like a kind of an authoritarian kind of like practice. Okay. And it's also like typically headlines are written in present tense. That's actually something that goes back to the 19th century. So it shows some sort of action and drama, so it's like got a whole different purpose altogether. Okay. And then there's words that are cut out typically. Okay. So that are, a lead is supposed to be a full sentence. It's supposed to be written in like past tense, okay, usually, because what you're writing about typically, not always, so but typically is something that's happened already. Okay. So so it's in past tense. But as you can see, if you look at some of the headlines in the New York Times right here, battle over electric vehicles is central to auto strike. Well, that is actually something that's going on right now. Let's see here. Texas senators take final vote. That's written in like some sort of like present tense. Okay. But actually what happened was it happened already. Okay. So that's, and you can see that it's actually Texas senators vote in trial of attorney general. So there's words that are missing that would otherwise be there. We say Texas senators have voted have voted. That would be the first thing. It would change, if you're writing a lead, you would change the verb to present tense. In the trial of the attorney general, and you would probably put the person's name, Ken Paxton, and then you would probably say something along the lines of like why he's being on trial for impeachment. Okay, so it'd be like a full sentence. Those words are cut out so they can get to like quickest, like a twit, almost like a tweet, get injected into your head as quickly as possible, so you'll actually click on and read the story. Okay. If you read now, their words the New York Times leads tend to be a little bit wordy, but as you can see, is a lot different than what actually apparently this actually isn't totally in past tense, because it actually was something that actually is in progress. But what they do is they actually typically update the story throughout. Um, I think by the time, I think the story, I think they actually have actually finished the voting. It's just that they hadn't updated their first thing here, but this should say after more than 9 hours of deliberations, Texas state senators have taken a final vote on the impeachment trial for Ken Paxton, the Republican Attorney General accused of, and you want to give some idea why people are actually like taking this vote in your lead, because the lead is actually supposed to really grab the reader and tell you and give them some idea like what they're reading and what the, and give them like some reason to keep reading. So in the headline, you want to like give the quick hit, but in the lead, you want to give like more substance, and you want to actually like provide that so that gives the reader even more incentive to keep reading. Okay, so it has, again, it's written in past tense, it has more substance. So I don't want to see that in this assignment where you're just going to write essentially what amount to 12 leads. Okay, and what this assignment does, okay, let me call it up right here. I don't know why it's not here right in my face. And it's just taking a long time. Hold on one second. It's actually like a worksheet from an old workbook. Now I got a pinwheel. Okay. Thank you. Oh, it's right here. Okay. All right. So anyway, leads and nut graphs. Okay. I'm just trying to get to a place here. I don't know why it's doing that. Goodbye. Okay. So this is an old worksheet. I'm not asking you to write on the worksheet. I'm asking you to do what you've been doing already, and that is actually just write a lead for each of these pieces of text on a Microsoft Word doc, not a PDF. Okay. I'm looking at that, by the way. There's people who keep sometimes continually provide their homework assignments on PDFs. It shows that to me they're not listening. Okay. I remind people of this on the announcements I make when I actually put out the assignment and post them. But anyway, as you can see here, now you don't necessarily try not to like, this gets a little bit wordy and basically sometimes like it gets a little confusing. All I'm asking for, they're basically the same types of leads. This is actually a lead that probably would be written in more of a present tense form, but basically they're just leads that just basically identify, don't get into like, they give different names to different types of leads. All I want is just basically a sentence that tells me what is the most unique thing and basically identifies what the story is about. Okay. And what they do is they give you what would be essentially the reporter's notes. Okay. This first one right here, a survey was released by the Child Abuse Center of Baltimore. A survey shows that 3 to 4 children die every day from abuse or neglect. Statistics in this survey show that number of child abuse neglect cases reported at the end of the year rose from 2.7 million, 2.5. What you have to do is you have to like kind of think about this reportage here is actually new, no matter like what points they're making. And what you need to do is they're giving like a whole bunch of things here. What you need to do is narrow this down to essentially one sentence, but you don't have to put every single thing. And actually you shouldn't put every single thing that's in this little piece of information here. Okay. You really just need to narrow this down. I would say there's actually like two things that are probably like maybe like interesting here, but one is more interesting than the other in this first one right here. And you should emphasize that one thing and that's it. Okay. Because that one piece of information that's in this section right here is actually more interesting than the other thing, I would say, that people learning it for the first time. Okay. This next thing here is a demonstration. They show you people basically are demonstrating here. They show you people who are getting arrested. What you need to think about here is like, what's the newest big in each of these stories? What's the newest biggest thing to the reader? Okay, what's the latest thing that happened? What maybe separates this protest from other protests that have happened? Okay, and again, thinking this is a judgment call. You have to be a self-manager. You have to think what's unique and new and interesting thing here. Okay, there's a robbery here. You got to think about the newest, biggest thing there. This is a big one. One big thing that happens here in these pieces of information here is numbers sometimes tell the story, and they're sometimes like the most interesting thing about a story. I've had people leave out the numbers in these things, and I've said to myself, why? Because they basically show like they basically separate a number showing like maybe a percentage increase or something like that, or would actually separate this story from another story, okay? Depending on how high the increase is. Kind of giving away some big hints here, okay? You know, more of this is down, some of these are actually the same, okay? As we go down. So what you have to do is you have to narrow these down to one sentence, and you don't have to put everything that's in here. This is a really long one right here. But what's like what separates this arrest from every other arrest of this type that happens, okay? And then you just basically write that sentence and that's it, okay? So that is due in a week, all right? And it's posted, and it's right here, and you submit it right here, okay? December 25th, all right? All right, and that will basically kind of retrench and give us a new starting point, and basically like trying to help build the foundation and learning how to build the foundation of a newspaper, and basically learning the foundation of a news article, and starting with the lead, and typically when you write a profile story, like what's the most unique important element here. And then this is the story that actually I went around and showed people. I'm sorry. I'm having a little hard time talking today just because I just mowed the lawn. I'm tired. But I basically sent this around here. It says, here's an example of a story that worked from our first grade assignment. Notice how everything is linear and focused and is focused on one thing that makes Brandon unique. Okay. Adesh wrote this. Congratulations. This actually was a B plus because I moved it like one paragraph around, showing a little bit of light editing here. But it was still a focused story. B and up grades, I say, are stories that are focused and clear, okay? Maybe require a little bit of editing, okay? As I demonstrated last week when I went over the rubric, okay? And actually, this paragraph right here was actually at the bottom of the story, and I'll show you why it shouldn't been in the bottom of the story. But Brandon Shim, currently a senior at Rutgers University, desires to further his passion for animation after accumulating over a total of 10 million views. Actually, this is actually not written in AP style form. It should have been 10 word million. Okay, that's how they write it in AP style. Again, they try to go for like similar language. Okay. All right. That's something I actually didn't catch. So basically, what makes that unique? Okay, so here you have a student who's got a lot to do already, and he's actually taking it a step further and gone beyond his schoolwork and done something that goes beyond that. If he had actually worked like just like 2 jobs at a restaurant and was trying to get his way through school, that would have been interesting enough to me, because he's actually doing something maybe is like unique to everybody. But he's actually gone beyond that and actually has done something that's actually had success with 10 million views on short films. Okay. All right. One thing I did is I shouldn't have done this, but I left that attribution, and you'll be seeing that in your papers. He said, I'll be talking about that as I go through the book lesson, but he said attribution, you need attribution. That's a form of footnoting in a story. Okay. And basically what that does is it tells the reader that this story came from somewhere. Okay. That, they didn't make it up, and it gives the reader some sort of validation, much like footnoting would do. Okay, only we don't footnote in a news story. This is the form of footnoting. It's just he said, she said, they said, or Shim said. Okay, so you typically do that like maybe in one paragraph, as you move along. Okay, as you move along in the story. What I did was I added throughout the story saying, although Shim is a full-time student, he said he dedicates an ample amount of time to predicting each one of his short films. Because basically what you have here is you have a little known fact, and that's when you should attribute to something in a story, is when you have a little known fact. Okay. So let's take that. Again, this is actually covered in some of the chapters we're writing. Let's take that graph right there. Okay. Just working on my old computer here. It's just moving a little slow. So you would add, because again, this gives the reader some sort of validation. So you say, although Shim is a full-time student, he said he dedicates an ample amount of time, because basically what that does, that essentially I mean, what he's saying is that you don't know necessarily that you're not there in the room with them. You don't necessarily know that, right? But what this does is it provides some sense of validation that, okay, so there's actually a source here. There's actually a source for this information. It's not something you're just kind of making up on your own. It's not something that you were coming from you that you're basically, it's not something that's coming from AI, okay? It's something that basically there's actually came out of somebody's mouth. And maybe he's lying, I don't know. But, that's why it's actually good to get maybe I'm not asking you to do this in the story. Sometimes it's good to get like another source, at least two sources in a story who can actually validate and actually has actually seen Shim do this. I'm not asking you to do that here, but growing up as a diehard fan, maybe DC and Marvel, Shim has incorporated and focused his or super. But at the very least, if you actually get it from the source, the person who's actually doing it, provides some validation because he's sticking his neck out there and saying this stuff. And he knows that if it's a lie, then there's somebody who's going to call him on it. Okay, so by attributing it to him, it gives some sort of sense of validation that came from somewhere and it's not a lie. Okay, all right. So that's something that we're going to be working on as we move on in the semester, starting now. Okay, we're going to be adding attribution to stories. Okay. Recently, now I moved this paragraph is at the very bottom. I moved it up here because I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. He was offered multiple positions by Pixar and Universal Studios. This is at the bottom of the story. I was like, oh my God, how many students can claim that? Okay. Now you doesn't say he actually got that job, but so if he actually got that job, I would have said actually maybe that should actually move up. But the fact that he's actually been doing this and it led to this, that's interesting to me. Like, what is the story about? What makes him unique? Well, he's done this, and because of that, he's earned this job offers from these big places. Okay. Recently, Shim was offered this right here. I'm sorry. I actually made up this quote because I felt like this needed a quote here. Basically, just saying this has been the most amazing journey for me. I wanted people to get the idea that, like, how does he react? Like, how does he feel about that? That's actually something that's new, interesting. Is he like just kind of fall on his face, like, oh my God, is he overjoyed? I felt like it needed some color here, Um, and then maybe we get into some background here. His journey was sparked through Instagram when a platform released a genre called Reels. It was a slow start we started with 100 views. It wasn't until his transition to YouTube, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's still like important information. It's good to know, but it's back in June. So I probably would have asked for maybe even more stuff that's happening right now before we got to this. But basically, this is like good background. So this stuff goes later. It's interesting information, but it happened in the past, so it goes later. How everything came to this point. Okay. And then it talks about how when he was a child, I changed this. This should have said Shim, but anyway, how he came about started with his passions and he was criticized for them, but he was able to overcome those obstacles, those criticisms to basically keep steady focused on his dream. He had faith in God that kind of helped inspire to get him to this place. Okay. Some more background. Okay. Going even further back. All right. All right, so that's basically, I sent that one around to show you an example of a story that worked. So don't forget that story is actually due. Again, this lecture is going to be posted on Monday. So I say today, I'll say Monday. Okay, the story is going to be due at the end of the day. All right, so make sure I try to grade all these right around the time they're posted. So, or right around the time they're uploaded, I should say. Okay. All right. So there we have it. There we have the new assignment we have, and I also have a discussion point that I'll be showing you guys that I'll be showing you guys after this after I talk about the readings and what I expect. Okay, there'll be a class participation thing, and it's actually I don't often do this give like a discussion point as a class participation exercise other than maybe like I ask people to react for certain stories or something like that. But I felt like I was doing this lesson. I was doing this demonstration in my one of my in-person classes, and I felt, well, this is actually maybe something I should do for the online class. So it'll be a discussion. So anyway, let's go to the chapters and talk about those. Okay, because again, I keep getting questions about this. And it's interesting. Like, actually, first of all, like in case one thing I should say before I continue is I've had some have actually been asked this question. People have been said that they, I don't ever take like, I don't ever take, I think I said this last week, actually. I don't ever take, these video lectures down. Okay. So just so you know, so let me just reiterate that point. That's the discussion point. I'll get to that in a bit. But anyway, and again, the other question I've been continuing to get, which I've gotten for a number of years actually, is I don't grade on the reading assignments. Okay, I just basically go over them, and I hope that you read them because you're supposed to reinforce what I talk about in these lectures. Okay, so, okay, so anyway, so I asked you again, chapter 7, 9, and 7, 9, and 13. 7 is basically, helps you with the lead component of the story, and basically trying to identify the central point. Okay, I mean, notice the story I talked about last week. I talked about a student who was interested in videos. Well, sometimes it's good to like kind of almost think again like one word, basically something that kind of you can use and like is consistently throughout from paragraph to paragraph in the story. That will help develop some sort of singular theme. And if we go, actually, I should have actually kept that up, but the story, yes, I did actually. The story I used an example of the story that works. You can see that he has a desire to like Brandon Shim has a desire to further his passion of film. So basically, that passion in films stays as a consistent theme throughout that story. But there are branches off of that consistent theme of that story that they talk about in the book. Okay, just that the lead really has to identify that central theme. Okay, in this case, the passion for videos and like the success over it. Okay, with Brandon Shim. But then you have to think of ways like that basically answer the who, what, where, how, why, when. Okay. So it's not, so you don't like divert off of the central theme, but you just maybe branch off of it. Okay. And provide additional substance, here are some of the things they talk about, like we don't really get into this in this class, like photography and that sort of thing, but maybe like, maybe things that maybe you could take consideration when you actually put together the story, like additional sources, additional information, maybe quotes, things like that, that can basically like make the story a fuller story. Okay. I mean, it talks about developing like a story outline. I mean, that could be very helpful. It doesn't have to be the old fashioned Roman numeral 1 central theme, Roman numeral 2. It doesn't be that. Like when I actually do an outline of the story, I'll try to write like a lead, and then I'll put like the various points of answering those questions: who, what, where, why, when, how, like maybe a series of like lines below. Okay. And I try to like basically develop that story after that into a consistent narrative. Okay. I mean, it talks about how like, the video and audio stories, they follow that same kind of pattern. Okay. Basically staying on that central theme, central focus, the passion again with Brandon Shim, the passion for videos and developing it into a possible career that he's doing. Okay. Summary news lead is, I mean, that's basically like typical lead that we always have. Okay. And basically, I mean, every lead just basically essentially summarizes what the story is about, essentially. Okay. It doesn't really have to have a name like summary lead, but basically they show you the difference between like what we had when I showed you the writing the leads assignment. They showed like a patch of information, but what I want you to do is write it into a coherent, simple sentence. Okay, that shows you the difference there. And one of the things that's typically not done in a lead is you don't put the name of the person unless it's somebody well known or something like that, because that's like a name of a person. It could be like something you stumble over, that sort of thing. Typically put like things like addresses. Okay, it says was severely injured, because again, is how relevant is it at this point? How relevant is it even to the whole story? Was severely injured Sunday afternoon when the bicycles they were riding were struck near the intersection of West. I mean, now they're going into the specific intersection. I mean, there's all stuff that can be answered within the story itself. Driven by a man, police said had a blood alcohol. I mean, they're really throwing the kitchen sink in here without a license. I mean, it's really And then, the guy without a license, again, there's all stuff that can be identified in the story, but all done in the first sentence. I mean, it's a ramble, okay? One Mechanicsburg man, so that gives people an idea that it's somebody nearby. So it even leaves a little bit of mystery. So maybe entices you to keep reading as opposed to just getting all the information in right away. Okay. So and then another severely injured after the bicycles they were riding were struck by a drunken driver Sunday afternoon. And that's all you really need to know after the first paragraph. Just the important points that basically help you keep reading. You also do want to leave a little bit of mystery. You don't want to, I mean, again, I'd say the mystery is revealed basically essentially in the first paragraph. But you do want to leave a little bit of mystery so people will keep reading and not just say like, well, geez, why bother? Why keep reading down to the bottom? And then like your advertisers will be like, nobody's reading past the first paragraph, and I put my advertisement at the bottom of the story, and I want people to read them, read the story, okay? This is a simple, direct sentence that gets right to the point with words that are like easy to pronounce. Okay. Again, they give you kind of like different parts of the story, like Warren Buffett is nearing a deal, things to look for. Now, his name would be put in the lead because he's a very famous person, one of the richest people in the world. Okay, so it's about a deal and basically how he's trying to expand his business and blah blah blah. So yeah. Let's just move right along here. It goes really slow. Now, here's the section that talks about the difference between layoffs. I also, by the way, I provide a, actually, I moved away from that. In the story assignment itself on Canvas, I actually provide, you'll see a link to something that basically helps describe the difference between leads and headlines, but it's also right here in the book. Okay. You can see again, like it tells you a little bit of a seed that gets you to like kind of like interested in the story, but it doesn't provide the depth you need to keep reading the story. Okay, so what this does, it helps you click on the story, as what a headline does. Okay, but it doesn't help you read the story. What it does is helps you gets you to the lead. The lead it then does really the selling job and provides the substance that basically helps you keep reading because maybe it involves somebody you know. It maybe involves the local economy. It involves like it has those branches that you need to basically like really get interested in the story. Okay, so Microsoft begins latest layoff. Microsoft has started cutting. Now that here's the lead. Microsoft has started cutting thousands of positions. Notice that it's has started. Basically, it's something. Let me say it's partially past tense. Okay, so it started already, but it's a continuing process. Okay. This is written in like a past tense, present tense. This is written more like, I guess, it's a different form of past tense. Okay. Has started cutting thousands of positions, mostly in its sales department. Days after announcing it would shift its sales strategy to focus on more cloud services. Okay. More of a business oriented story. So basically, probably drag in the interest of maybe the stockholder, that sort of thing. While this did not, this headline basically is maybe just interested generally, maybe people who have like Microsoft programs. Maybe it's interest to people who actually like maybe Microsoft is based locally, so they have interest in that. But what this is it drags in more readers by providing more substance. Okay, that's what the lead does. Why it's a full sentence. Okay, you try to be as specific as possible. The city council passed an ordinance that affect all parents and teenagers within the city limits. Well, that's very broad. And it's actually something that we could say about a lot of things. Okay. The city council ignored objections, but the mayor, blah, 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 on a 6-1 vote to enact a dusk to dawn curfew to keep you. Now that's more specific because maybe now you drag in people who are like parents because they care about like, how their teenagers may be affected by something like this. It drags in maybe like teenagers because they care about how things might be affecting them directly. Okay. You try to use like strong active verbs, active voice, by the way, and the book talks about that too. You basically want to have something that essentially is active voice. And that basically means putting the noun before the verb. Okay. The activity I'm going to do today, by the way, that at least the discussion point might confuse that a little bit. So, but I'll explain. But So the noun comes before the verb. It's much like you would talk, okay? He said, okay? You want to basically, that's how way people talk. What happened? Well, he said this. You wouldn't say the statement was said by him. It's like kind of a slow, lazy, almost like the way they wrote back in the 1700s. You wouldn't like say things like that, okay? The person was bitten by the dog. No, the dog bit him. Okay, fewer words too, easier to say. Okay, but actually, like maybe like what they try to do is you want to use like you also want to describe words much like you would do in a conversation. Like you want to use like stronger words, or maybe you want to use like verbs that are like set up so that it actually has a stronger punch to them, or something like that. It took a big bite out of him. Maybe it was like a bite that left a cut, or something like that. Or you want to like try to like basically get the reader to feel like they're there or something like that, okay? Um the man punched him. Okay. But how big of a punch? The man clobbered him. Maybe you want to say that. Maybe you want to say something a little bit more of a, no pun intended, punch. Okay. All right. So yes, they talk about passive verbs. One person. Sometimes there's actually like passive verbs that are necessary. One person was killed because actually in that particular situation, like the was killed or others were injured. Okay, because the most important thing to know is that like the person was killed. You wouldn't put like sometimes like it can get a little bit too wordy when you say the accident left two people dead or something like that. So sometimes it is necessary to use like words in a passive way. Okay. Um, in this particular case, actually, like a car was traveling. So what actually would say is slammed, a strong verb into a concrete bridge pillar. So sometimes actually, but most of the time, it's actually good to say, use active verbs. Killing one person, injuring four others. I would say it would be okay in this. If somebody was actually killed in an accident or something like that, I would say it'd be okay to use a passive verb. Okay, because it involves a death. That's the big deal, the biggest, most important thing. Okay, so sometimes there are exceptions to the active voice rule. Okay, can stress the unusual. We talked about that. What separates this crime, and you'll see that we're going to talk about that actually when I actually grade your leads. There's one in particular, number 7 on the leads assignment, where there's like one thing that separates something from everybody else. Easter Bunny. Oops, sorry. Just want to see if you're paying attention. That basically separates this story from every other story. Okay, and involves an attempted murder. Okay, yeah, and that's all comes with interview process, which I'll talk about next week. The interview process basically gets you going, gets you like thinking about where you were try to really dig for that one thing that maybe goes beyond the pale, goes beyond the norm. When you're interviewing the police chief, you want to like find out like if there's like a crime that happened, what makes this crime different from every other crime. Okay, you localize and you update when you do your leads and then your stories. You basically want to find out if it's something that's happened, actually something that's local. Okay, in particular. Okay, again, I talked about attribution, and that's right here. And basically, they talk about the importance of that. Attribution makes the story objective. It also shows that again, it's not from you, it's not your opinion, it's not your creative writing. Okay, so that's another reason why it's footnoting in a journalistic way. And of course, as we've talked about over and over again, striving for simplicity, that's hugely important. Okay, trying to keep things as simple without exaggerating. Okay, like which can happen through adjectives. Knowing your audience, knowing like if you're writing something like it's happening in your local area, like okay, let's say it's happening at Rutgers, you want to know, oh, how does this matter to Rutgers students? Okay, even if is this something that's affecting classes, is something affecting the roads at Rutgers, that sort of thing. They become much more important than it does if it's something that happens maybe like to New Brunswick residents who lives outside of Rutgers. Okay. All right. So again, we don't do these things at the end of the chapter. Okay. We just do these written assignments that I give out. Okay, the body of a news story. That's chapter 9. Are you still with me? Okay. That's why I slipped in that little like hint in before about that will help you hopefully with. I want to see if people actually pick that up on the leads assignment. That was a big hint I just gave. Okay, it was more than a hint, it was an answer. Okay, the inverted pyramid style. Okay, so here we are. The upside down triangle. You'll be hearing about this. Inverted pyramid stories arrange the information in descending order of importance or newsworthiness. I would say the only time there's like there was a movie that was made, and this is where I make the big comparison to like movie and literature. So, a lot of because movie and literature have the big mysteries at the end. I would like to say I should show this up before. The only time, one of the very few times that did not happen. Oh God, let's hope this thing doesn't go very slow. It was a movie made a very long time ago. I'm not a fan of the old movies, to be honest with you. I mean, when I say old, for me, that would be before 1967. That's what the year I was born. But actually, there was this one movie made in 1950, Sunset Boulevard, where basically I would say this is actually maybe the one example where, or maybe, basically maybe the lead of the story is actually in the beginning of the story. And what happens is basically like the rest of the story essentially deconstructs how it happened. Okay. Because the newest biggest thing actually is that the man was found in the pool. Okay. William Holden.
Yes, this is Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles, California. It's about 5 o'clock in the morning. That's the homicide squad, complete with detectives and newspapermen. A murder has been reported from one of those great big houses in the 10,000 block. You'll read about it in late editions, I'm sure. You'll get it over your radio, see it on television. Because an old-time star is involved. One of the biggest. But before you hear it all distorted and blown out of proportion, before those Hollywood columnists get their hands on it, maybe you'd like to hear the facts, the whole truth. If so, you've come to the right party. You see, the body of a young man was found floating in the pool of her mansion, with 2 shots in his back and 1 in his stomach. Nobody important, really. Just a movie writer with a couple of B pictures to his credit. Poor dope. He always wanted it. Well, in the end, he got himself a pool. Only the price turned out to be a little high.
So like I said, that's probably just the one example where maybe like, famous or a movie writer actually probably like, I don't know if that guy would be famous enough to put his name in the lead, but basically the big deal happened at the beginning of the movie. And then like I said, the rest of it deconstruction, like who did it? That sort of thing. And it doesn't actually reveal essentially, it doesn't, but it hints at it, who did it. Okay. So that's maybe the one example where maybe a movie didn't have the big reveal at the end, it had at the beginning. Okay. Yes, we're gonna get into it. That's Jaws. But anyway, going back to the book. So, basically the lead states that the most newsworthy, important, or striking information establishes the center of the report of the story. And that's the fat part of the triangle. Okay. And that is right on this page right here. In chapter 9. Let's blow this up a little bigger. What do you say? I'm in a kind of a giddy mood a little bit. Ha ha ha. No. Just make sure nothing freezes. Okay. So this is essentially what I call, now I get more specific about what's required in a news story as we progress in this class, but this is what I call essentially the exoskeleton of the story. And forgive me for my lack of military terms. And then I'll move on to like what's essentially the introskeleton of a newspaper, of a news story. But this essentially is like how it's generally outlined. Okay. And what it does is it takes like essentially not a crime story, I'm sorry, an accident story, and how you would actually like report it. in a news story. And the fat part basically identifies the most important part of the story, which is the lead and what happened. Okay. This apparently is a story that did not involve somebody who was dead. Okay. So it summarizes the story. Apparently, in this particular story, there was an accident and some people were injured. So that would be the lead of the story, and people want to know. But then you want to know, then declining order of importance come the probably more specific details that are answered by the who, what, where, how, when, that you wouldn't necessarily be able to fit, or wouldn't necessarily be the most important part of the story. You just want to know something that happened that could affect your life, could affect your drive, could affect your commute, could affect people you know. And that incident happened. You hear these maybe sirens happening around your house. You want to know what happened. You want to quickly spit out to you accident, injuries. Okay. So then you break it down to the smaller detail, and that's when it gets the order of importance, and then the triangle gets narrower or more narrow. Identifies the injured, maybe you know the person. Okay. Explains how the accident occurred. You want to know if like there are people responsible. Okay. Yeah, and apparently there was reports of charge. But again, the first thing you want to know is something happened and what happened. Okay. And then it gets into the more minor details. Apparently there was actually like charges against the driver, and then you probably would want to name the driver, maybe know the person. And then you get quotes from the driver. Quotes aren't necessarily the most important thing in a story. You should, I'm a big believer in never having a lead as a quote, or a quote as a lead, the very first paragraph of your story. Oh God, I hate that. I know some people say like, well, it's okay sometimes. And I say, well, that only time a quote is good as a lead is if somebody says something outrageous and the quote is the story. And we've seen that happen with things like this, the crap that Mel Gibson has said or something like that, you know, the anti-Semitic stuff he was saying and things like that, where the quote becomes the story, you know. And then like things like damage to cars. And then here's a big one: traffic problems caused by the accident. You wouldn't necessarily put that in the very first paragraph of the story because you want to be sensitive too. I'm a big believer that people have compassion. And that's usually typically, I would say the first thing I'd want to know is like, was people hurt and how much and that sort of thing, especially if you know them, the local proximity of the story. Okay. Then you probably want to know, I would guess, again, it's really a judgment made on your part. Okay. Then I'd probably want to know like, okay, what's then like, how does this affect traffic, things like that. Okay. If nobody was injured or anything like that, then maybe traffic would rise up and become the most important thing in the story. Okay. Especially if it's something that happened on the turnpike or something like that. It's like a major highway, but people being hurt, that sort of thing. That's why there's rubbernecking delays. I happen to believe that it's not just people being voyeurs or people being, vultures or anything like that. I actually believe that people have like some sort of interest in like what happens. Okay. To other people. That's why like when there's a hurricane that destroys like big parts of New Orleans and you live in New Jersey, you want to know what happened there. I mean, where people are dying on TV in Katrina in 2005, and people were tuning in to see what would happen. They was actually watching people die on TV. It was terrible, but I think people actually had compassion. Okay. All right. I mean, basically some of this goes on to more like I'm writing about the second paragraph. Well, I mean, that's just providing additional detail that's more important, more specific, perhaps. Background, again, as I showed you with that story before about Shim, basically you don't want to have too much too soon. News is about what's new. So you want to like show like essentially that, okay? You want to show what is the news first, what is new. Now this, I got to say, this part I kind of object to of the chapter, which is why, again, not a big book believer, okay? That's why I don't test you on these things. I actually believe that a news story should end with a quote typically. When what they actually call a walk-off quote. You end with that's why the point is narrow at the bottom of the triangle, inverted pyramid or inverted triangle. That's why it's small, because the least important thing should go at the bottom. And typically it's like a quote. I would call a walk-off quote. Okay, you just end the story. A story is supposed to actually just dwindle out. Okay. Yes, there's things called kicker and things like that, but it's just supposed to dwindle out. And when I know I'm going to be seeing this in stories are conclusions. I know, I look, I don't blame you. It's not your fault. You've been dealing with this throughout your lives, writing conclusions to stories. I actually just had to write something for the Rutgers journalism department where I actually wrote a conclusion because it was something that basically talks about my teaching philosophy and things like that. And because I'm getting apparently promoted to level 5, and So anyway, I actually wrote in summary because it was a different form of writing. It was an essay style. But we're not doing that in this story. We're writing a top down, upside down story where the least important thing is at the bottom. And we don't want to, your conclusion is your lead. You're basically making some sort of conclusion about what happened, whether it's an accident or like somebody's hurt or something like that. Concluding a body floating in a pool and somebody murdered. The conclusion is the lead. Okay. It's upside down. So you don't do that. You don't do that with your very first paragraph. No, you don't want to do that. Because you'll be crazy nuts. No, I'm kidding. You want to be you want to show, am I high or something? You want to show well, I'm performing for my family. You want to show that body floating in the pool is what matters to people, and then you deconstruct it afterward. And then the last thing you might want to talk about is like, are people in the neighborhood reacting and blah blah blah. Yeah, the tentacles of the story, the branches of the tree, that sort of thing. So, all right. Anyway, my daughter walked by and she started making fun of me. Anyway, so let's just like continue on here. Hey, I have to entertain myself too, right? So, oh, by the way, here's my dog. Say hi to my dog. Bruiser, say hi. Are you a snuggly dog? You're a good doggy. You like to hang in there while I do this. Anyway. All right. I gotta keep you guys engaged in this thing. So, all right, the hourglass style. Well, I mean, that's another part I kind of object to. I will say this though, that that the inverted pyramid, I would like use that as a general guidance for how a story should be written. But sometimes I would say like sometimes the details in a story are equally important from almost top to the bottom. Almost always the very first paragraph will definitely be the most important part of the story. Okay, not always. It always is. Okay, because that's when you basically summarize what the story is about. But the details that follow, especially like maybe like on a profile story or something like that, or like stories we're going to do, or we're going to get reaction to things that happen on campus and stuff like that. Sometimes the details are of equal importance. So it's actually maybe sometimes the story is actually shaped more like a mushroom, you know, where it's actually kind of more equal importance and it's like a straight line down. Okay. Again, like I've talked about the importance of focusing. Again, you got an apple cord. Right. Here's my how these things are. Again, I demonstrated this last week. When they get tangled, it's like just like it's a mess that you can't follow and you can't like figure out the tangling. You got a shoelace, right? This happens when I go running, and you got this knot. You can't like untangle the knot, especially with me when I don't put my glasses on when I run. Um, that's what happens when you have a story that's not focused, is that you can't follow, you can't untie the knot. You got to like stay focused, and that's why I say it's a good idea to keep in mind maybe like one word or phrase that stays consistent throughout the story. Okay, and it's a unique word or phrase about that person, about that incident, about that thing that you're focusing on. Okay. Okay, so narrative style. Okay, well, again, that's more of the state. I mean, all stories essentially are narratives. Okay, where you essentially act as like some sort of unseen narrator in a story where you're basically identifying the central point of the story, and you continue throughout and provide the details and the depth that help make the story important. Now transitions are something we're gonna be talking about a bit. Transitions basically mean that essentially like a story that basically like parts of the story that basically help guide you through and basically identify you from point to point. And what that means is basically the minor details that come after the lead are essentially transitions. The paragraphs you identify are transition because you're transitioning from one point to the next. Okay. So I don't know what I did with this thing here. Here we go. So basically, what you're doing essentially is you have your lead, okay, and that's again how you typically would spell a lead in a news story. And then what happens is you follow with transitions. So when you're actually like that accident thing I was showing you before with the inverted pyramid, providing different details, those are essentially transitions. Only what you do is you try to like use words that maybe like sometimes they'll kind of like help you kind of help the reader kind of guide the reader along. Like maybe you would use the word also the start of a sentence, or maybe like you're kind of moving on to a point that kind of like maybe is a different point, but like is still connected to the overall theme. You would like say however, the transitional phrases, okay? Additionally, you don't have to use them all the time, okay? But maybe like you're kind of making a point after point. It's good to kind of break up the flow of the writing, the narrative writing by using these transitional words as you move along, maybe you report about the injuries here. Okay, after the crash here in the lead. And then you want to like maybe talk about the traffic. So additionally, it caused traffic. Okay. All right. So that's essentially what, essentially those small paragraphs are essentially like transitions. One thing we're going to talk about as we move along is that in addition to transitions, we're not getting into this part just yet. Also, a story usually typically contains anecdotes. When you transition from one point to the next, you want to also try to provide an anecdote, maybe something that happened. You can do this in the profile story too, if you're able to, but those are like essentially little stories within a story that help illuminate the larger points in the story. Okay. Maybe like if you're writing about like, again, you're writing a story about somebody who's like we did with Brandon Shim. He's actually like, he's developed this whole thing with like, he's moved on to Pixar and all this stuff, and because of all his great movie making and filmmaking, that's actually like made him a bit of a superstar. Maybe like we could have like a little small like a paragraph or two in there that takes him in like inside his workspace or something like that and shows him hard at work. Basically like putting like shows him like trying to like work on homework and on the one hand and also working on film at the other hand. And he's like toggling screens in the computer. So basically, that's when you have like an anecdote that shows a little story within a story. That's real, I would say, like ground level reporting that shows the details, of the depth of like the person's passion, But we'll be getting more into that as we get into the weeks as we move along. So, all right. So anyway, let's move on to the chapters. The next chapter is actually coming up. The importance of examples. Again, that's actually that's an examples are actually another phrase of that is actually other way of phrasing that is actually like anecdotes. Okay. Need to be fair. Obviously, you want to try to be as fair as possible. That's actually the whole thing when they talk about like trying to show both sides of a story. I think sometimes that gets a little like heavy-handed because sometimes like fairness goes too far, especially when you deal with things like getting into politics here. I mean, when you dealt with like the insurrection of the Capitol of January 6th, I'm sorry, there was just really not two sides of that story. Okay. And these people raided the Capitol and beat things up. Is that really we're supposed to get the other side of the story of that, like people like committing a crime? I mean, like we could find out. It's a good idea to maybe find out why they did it. So maybe that would be the other side you talk about. But it's not. You're trying to find out like why people do things because you want to find out like why people commit crimes. So, but that's not necessarily fairness. That's just showing depth to a story and trying to get to the bottom of it. Okay. I often feel like that can be like misconstrued. Okay. And then the last chapter we're going to be talking about before we get into our activity here, writing for broadcast news, chapter 13. Well, basically, I threw this chapter in here because I guess we're teaching chapters and we're teaching journalism on all platforms, but there's probably no better example to show like why you should go crazy in your writing with adjectives and overflowing writing and that sort of thing because broadcast news more than anything actually shows that the economy of words, basically the importance of having everybody understand what's being said. And a lot of times broadcast scripts are written that way. As you can see here, this is like, a broadcast news copy. It shows the difference between that and like print news copy. A woman from Austin escaped yesterday from Travis County Courthouse after being convicted of assault and battery. So that's something that would appear on the web in a news story. But then what happens is when we actually broadcast it over news, they even want a more detailed, much like I showed you with the unfortunate MLK assassination. Police are looking for an Austin woman this afternoon. Boom. They come out with it quickly and even more succinctly. Maria Lopez fled Travis County Courthouse moments after being convicted of assault and battery. It said that's why, I mean, man, you don't want, if you start flooding that with adjectives and that sort of thing, you're gonna get readers like pissed off, like, I'm not even watching this. They're gonna turn the channel. Goodbye. So long. They just want to blurt it out because a lot of local news, especially, is unfortunately is a lot about crime and stuff like that. Assistant prosecutor, this is how a movie, this is how a broadcast script will be written. It'll be written like this. Sometimes it's written inside squares. Okay. Assistant prosecutor Daniel Rodriguez says Lopez hit a guard and ran for freedom at 3 o'clock. It's not even written in AP style. Woman is blah blah blah, 28 years old. So bang, bang, bang. The broadcast news. Okay. I mean, the leads are quicker, they're much more to the point. Okay. There's things like soft leads, things. I'll be getting into that. That's actually like in feature news stories and things like that, which we'll be getting into. Okay. I'm actually moving to the part that actually shows an actual script and how it's shown. Or my computer is slow. So there we go. Example. That's a lot of times it's actually shown like this. A lot of times they print things actually in capital letters. I've done that actually where I've actually like gone on screen. Actually, where I work right now, I've gone on video and actually it's printed in capital letters when they put it on a teleprompter. Okay. So yeah. The sources, we'll be getting into that, press releases, things like that. A lot of things come off delivered like on a police report or a press release or something like that. Okay. So anyway, I think I've shown you enough of that. I actually got rid of, I was going to show you, I mean, I showed you the MLK report and how that was delivered. Now I want to get into this thing here, the discussion point here. This will be posted also on Monday. All right. And what I want people do is contribute to this. No, there's no extra credit involved in this, but this is how we gauge class participation in asynchronous class. People participating. So instead of like, I would be asked. What I did was I actually showed this certain movie to parts of it to people in the class, and I wanted people to basically give me an idea of what they think the lead is. Okay. So what I want you to do is actually, I want you to give me an idea, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you parts of Jaws. Yes, Jaws. I figure just about everybody's seen this movie, so I'm not giving anything away. It came out almost 50 years ago. What the hell? Actually, just inspired by this because I just saw the play on Broadway that shows the making of Jaws and how funny that was. The stars Richard Dreyfuss is of the three characters, the only one who's still alive. How whiny he was and everything about the whole filming process. Robert Shaw, who died shortly after the film was made in 1978. The film was made in 75. He had heart problems. He played Quint, the fisherman who was out there to try to get the shark. And then there was Chief Brody, played by Roy Scheider, who just died only a few years ago. He was about my dad's age. Anyway, so if you watched the lecture, you've discussed a certain movie and how the movies are opposite of news stories. Reveal the biggest, newest thing at the end, not the beginning. So I'm going to show you how basically how this is basically a triangle, and the movie is basically structured as a triangle with at least the oldest thing at the top, and then it comes down to the newest, biggest thing at the bottom. Okay. So from the discussion, should I said from the discussion in the lecture, what would you say the lead is? What would you say is the lead of the story if you were to encounter the saga detailed in the movie for the first time? So if you basically coming into the movie and you saw the whole movie, and let's say you're coming to Amity Island and to report about what had happened during this whole period of time, what would you put as the lead? Okay, because there's a lot of things that happen. Okay, and the discussion point with factoring. I want to see if you're participating. Okay. And I'm going to have other discussion points that actually will matter for like other stories that we do. Actually, will be connected to stories we do. But I want to see that you're actually also paying attention early on. Okay. I'm actually just going in here to try to fix the wording I had in there, but it's not really obliging here from the discussion in the lecture. What would you say is the lead? Okay. There we go. All right. So that'll be posted on Monday.